Sarah Martinez adjusted her Navy SEAL Trident pin on her jacket lapel as she walked through the parking lot of Lincoln Elementary School. The morning sun cast long shadows across the asphalt, and she could hear the distant sounds of children playing on the playground. Her 8-year-old son Tommy had been struggling at school lately, not with academics, but with something far more troubling. The phone call from Mrs. Henderson, Tommy's teacher, had come 3 days earlier. The conversation still echoed in Sarah's mind as she approached the school's main entrance. Mrs. Henderson had dismissed Tommy's claims about his mother's military service with a condescending laugh that made Sarah's blood run cold. Mrs. Martinez, the teacher, had said with barely concealed amusement, "Children often exaggerate about their parents' careers. I'm sure you understand. Tommy keeps telling the class that his mother was in the Navy SEALs, which is obviously impossible. Women aren't allowed in combat roles like that. Perhaps you could speak with him about telling the truth?" Sarah had remained silent for a long moment, her jaw clenched tight. She had spent 12 years serving her country, including 3 deployments to Afghanistan and 2 classified missions she could never discuss with anyone outside her unit. She had earned her Trident the hard way, completing Hell Week with a broken rib that she never reported to medical. She had saved lives, taken lives when necessary, and bled alongside brothers and sisters who trusted her with their lives. The assumption that she was lying about her service cut deeper than any physical wound she had ever endured. But it was the impact on Tommy that truly angered her. Her son had come home from school that day with tears in his eyes, confused and hurt that his teacher didn't believe him when he proudly shared stories about his mother's service. "Mom," Tommy had whispered that night as she tucked him into bed, "Mrs. Henderson says girls can't be SEALs. She says I'm making up stories about you. But you really were one, right? You have the medals and everything." Sarah had held her son close, feeling the weight of his confusion and the injustice of the situation. She had explained to him that some people didn't understand that rules had changed, that women now served in all military roles, including special operations. But she could see the doubt creeping into his young eyes, planted there by an educator who should have been encouraging his pride in his family. Now, as she walked through the school's hallways lined with colorful student artwork and motivational posters, Sarah felt the familiar calm that had served her well in hostile territories. She wasn't here to cause trouble or seek revenge. She was here to educate and to protect her son's sense of pride in his family's service. The secretary at the front desk looked up with a friendly smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I'm here to see Mrs. Henderson," Sarah said quietly. "I'm Tommy Martinez's mother." "Oh, wonderful. Mrs. Henderson mentioned you might stop by. She's in classroom 14, just down this hall and to the right. They're just finishing up their morning reading circle." Sarah nodded her thanks and made her way down the corridor. Through the classroom windows, she could see children sitting in a circle on a colorful carpet, listening as Mrs. Henderson read from a picture book. Tommy sat near the back, his attention focused on his hands rather than the story. Sarah's heart ached seeing her normally confident son looking so withdrawn. She waited outside the classroom until the reading session ended and the children dispersed to their desks for the next activity. Then, she knocked gently on the doorframe. Mrs. Henderson looked up from her desk, a practiced teacher smile spreading across her face. She was a woman in her late 40s with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun and wire-rimmed glasses that she pushed up her nose as she stood. "Mrs. Martinez. How lovely to finally meet you in person. Please, come in." Sarah entered the classroom, noting how Mrs. Henderson's eyes briefly took in her appearance. Sarah was dressed professionally in dark slacks and a blazer, her posture straight and confident. At 5'6" with lean muscle earned through years of grueling training, she looked more like a corporate executive than what most people imagined when they thought of a Navy SEAL. "I wanted to discuss Tommy's situation," Sarah said simply, keeping her voice level and professional. Mrs. Henderson's expression shifted slightly, becoming more serious. "Yes, of course. As I mentioned on the phone, Tommy seems to be having some difficulty distinguishing between fantasy and reality when it comes to family stories. It's actually quite common for children his age to embellish or even create elaborate tales about their parents' careers." "Is it?" Sarah asked, raising an eyebrow. Oh, absolutely, Mrs. Henderson continued, settling into her chair and gesturing for Sarah to take the seat across from her desk. Last year, I had a student who insisted his father was an astronaut. It turned out he was an air conditioning repair technician. Children just want their parents to seem special and exciting. Sarah remained standing, her hands clasped loosely behind her back in a posture that had become second nature during her military service. And what exactly has Tommy told you about my career? Mrs. Henderson adjusted her glasses again, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Well, he claims that you were a Navy SEAL for 12 years. He says you went on secret missions and saved people's lives. He even brought in what he said were your military medals for show and tell, though of course those could be purchased at any military surplus store. The dismissive tone in the teacher's voice made Sarah's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, but her expression remained calm. I see. And why do you believe these claims are false? Mrs. Henderson blinked, apparently surprised by the question. Well, I mean, obviously women aren't Navy SEALs. The Navy SEALs are an elite special forces unit that requires tremendous physical strength and endurance. It's a very demanding role that, frankly, no offense, isn't suited for women. When do you believe women were first allowed to serve in combat roles in the U.S. military? Sarah asked quietly. The teacher shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I'm not entirely sure of the exact dates, but I believe women are limited to support roles. Nursing, administration, that sort of thing. Not combat positions. Sarah nodded slowly. The ban on women in combat roles was officially lifted in 2013. The first women graduated from Army Ranger School in 2015. The first woman to complete Navy SEAL training graduated in 2021, though there were women serving in SEAL support roles and eventually in combat positions before that through various programs and policy changes. Mrs. Henderson's smile faltered slightly. Well, yes, perhaps some policies have changed recently, but certainly not 12 years ago when you claim to have served. I began my service in 2009, Sarah said calmly. I was part of a pilot program that allowed qualified women to serve in previously restricted roles. My service record, which I'd be happy to provide, shows assignments with SEAL Team 6 and multiple deployments to Afghanistan. The color began to drain from Mrs. Henderson's face, but she pressed on. Anyone can say they have a service record. I'm sure you understand my skepticism. Sarah reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her military identification card, placing it gently on the teacher's desk. Mrs. Henderson picked it up with trembling fingers, studying the official documentation that clearly identified Sarah as a retired Navy SEAL. This could be fake, Mrs. Henderson whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. It could be, Sarah agreed. Would you like me to provide additional verification? Before Mrs. Henderson could respond, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and allowed herself a small smile. The timing was perfect. Mrs. Henderson, Sarah said quietly, I've invited some of my former colleagues to join our conversation. I hope you don't mind, but I thought it might help clarify any remaining doubts about women serving in elite military units. Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened. Colleagues? Fellow veterans who served with me, Sarah explained. They were in the area for a reunion and were happy to stop by when I explained the situation. Through the classroom window, Mrs. Henderson could see several vehicles pulling into the school parking lot. Black SUVs and pickup trucks, their occupants beginning to emerge and walk toward the school entrance. Sarah's phone buzzed again with another text, We're here. 200 strong and ready to educate. The teacher's face had gone completely pale now, her hands shaking as she set down Sarah's military ID. 200? The reunion was well attended, Sarah said simply. My unit has always been close-knit. When one of us faces a problem, we all face it together. The first group of visitors appeared at the classroom door, and Mrs. Henderson's breath caught in her throat. These weren't the stereotypical image of gruff, intimidating soldiers that movies often portrayed. Instead, she saw a diverse group of men and women, all carrying themselves with the same quiet confidence that Sarah possessed. Leading the group was Master Chief Petty Officer James Rodriguez, Sarah's former team leader. Behind him stood Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos, one of the first women to officially complete SEAL training. Sergeant Major David Kim from the Army's Delta Force nodded respectfully to Sarah, followed by Captain Jennifer Walsh from Marine Force Recon. "Sarah," Master Chief Rodriguez said with a warm smile, "good to see you again. We heard someone was questioning your service record?" The classroom suddenly felt much smaller as more veterans filed in, each one moving with the precise, controlled movements that came from years of military training. Mrs. Henderson found herself surrounded by men and women of various ages, ethnicities, and backgrounds, but all sharing an unmistakable bearing that spoke of elite military service. Master Chief Rodriguez approached Mrs. Henderson's desk with measured steps, his uniform decorated with ribbons and badges that told the story of a distinguished career. Despite his intimidating credentials, his voice remained respectful and calm. "Ma'am, I'm Master Chief Petty Officer James Rodriguez, retired. I had the privilege of serving alongside Petty Officer Martinez for 6 years. She was one of the finest operators I've ever had the honor to command." Mrs. Henderson's mouth opened and closed soundlessly as she tried to process what was happening. Her small classroom had become filled with what appeared to be some of the most elite military personnel in the country, all vouching for the woman she had dismissed just minutes earlier. Lieutenant Commander Santos stepped forward next, her bearing as professional as it was commanding. "Mrs. Henderson, I understand there's been some confusion about women serving in combat roles. I'm Maria Santos, and I was the third woman to officially complete Navy SEAL training. But Sarah here was breaking barriers long before the official policies caught up." Captain Walsh from the Marines added, "Sarah saved my life during a joint operation in Helmand Province in 2014. She carried me 2 miles through hostile territory with a dislocated shoulder and enemy fire all around us. I owe her everything." The teacher's legs felt weak, and she sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the testimonials pouring in from around the room. These weren't actors or people Sarah had hired to play a role. These were genuine military heroes, and their respect for Sarah was evident in every word they spoke. Tommy, who had been quietly working at his desk, looked up in amazement as he recognized some of the faces from photographs his mother kept in their living room. His eyes lit up with pride and vindication as he realized that his teacher was finally learning the truth about his mother's service. Sergeant Major Kim approached with a folder in his hands. "Mrs. Henderson, I took the liberty of bringing some documentation that might interest you. These are declassified mission reports that mention Petty Officer Martinez's actions during Operation Red Dawn in Afghanistan." He placed the folder on her desk, and Mrs. Henderson opened it with trembling hands. The official military letterhead and detailed reports painted a picture of Sarah's service that was far more impressive than anything Tommy had shared during show and tell. "As you can see," Sergeant Major Kim continued, "Sarah was awarded the Bronze Star for her actions during a hostage rescue mission where she single-handedly neutralized 3 enemy combatants and secured the safety of 2 captured aid workers." Mrs. Henderson read the reports with growing horror at her own ignorance and prejudice. The documentation was overwhelming, detailed, and completely authentic. Sarah hadn't just served as a Navy SEAL, she had been exceptional at it. Master Chief Rodriguez noticed the teacher's distress and softened his tone. "Ma'am, we're not here to intimidate or embarrass you. We're here because Sarah's son was hurt by the suggestion that his mother's service wasn't real. That boy has every right to be proud of what his mother sacrificed for this country." Captain Walsh nodded in agreement. "Sarah spent 3 tours in Afghanistan, missed countless birthdays and holidays, and put her life on the line repeatedly so that children like Tommy could grow up safe and free. For someone to suggest that her service was imaginary is deeply hurtful, not just to her, but to all of us who served alongside her." The room fell quiet for a moment, the weight of the situation settling on everyone present. Mrs. Henderson looked around at the faces surrounding her, seeing not anger or hostility, but disappointment and a desire for understanding. Lieutenant Commander Santos broke the silence. "Mrs. Henderson, we understand that the military has traditionally been male-dominated. The changes in policy regarding women in combat roles are relatively recent, and not everyone is aware of how much the landscape has shifted. But, she continued, her voice firm but not unkind, ignorance can be educated away. What concerns us is the dismissal of a child's pride in his parents' service without taking the time to verify the facts. Mrs. Henderson finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. I had no idea. I thought I was protecting the other children from what I believed were false stories. I never imagined. Sarah stepped closer to the teacher's desk, her expression softer now than it had been when she first arrived. Mrs. Henderson, I understand your skepticism. The military has changed dramatically over the past 20 years, and those changes aren't always well publicized or understood by civilians. She paused, glancing at her son who was watching the interaction with wide eyes. But, Tommy has never lied about my service. Everything he's told your class is true. When he says his mother served her country, he's not making up stories to impress his classmates. He's sharing his family's history with pride. Master Chief Rodriguez added, that boy has sacrificed too. Military children give up a lot when their parents serve. They move frequently, deal with long deployments, and live with the constant worry that their parent might not come home. Tommy's pride in his mother's service is well earned. Mrs. Henderson looked at Tommy, seeing him with completely new eyes. She had viewed his stories as attention-seeking behavior, never considering that they might be genuine expressions of a child's love and admiration for his parent. Tommy, she called softly, her voice thick with emotion. Would you come here, please? The 8-year-old approached cautiously, still uncertain about what was happening but comforted by the presence of so many of his mother's friends and colleagues. Mrs. Henderson knelt down to his level, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Tommy, I owe you an apology. A very big apology. I was wrong to doubt the stories you told about your mother. I was wrong to suggest that you weren't telling the truth. Tommy looked up at his mother, then back at his teacher. It's okay, Mrs. Henderson. Mom says sometimes people don't understand about women being soldiers because it's still kind of new. The simple forgiveness in the child's voice made several of the veterans exchange glances, impressed by the maturity and grace the young boy was showing. Captain Walsh crouched down next to Mrs. Henderson. Tommy, your mother is one of the bravest people I've ever known. You should be very proud of her, and you should never let anyone make you feel bad for sharing her story. Lieutenant Commander Santos added, and, Tommy, you can tell your classmates that women can do anything men can do in the military now. We're pilots, infantry soldiers, special operations officers, and everything in between. Mrs. Henderson stood up slowly, facing the room full of veterans who had taken time out of their reunion to support their former teammate. I don't know how to properly apologize for what I've done. I made assumptions based on outdated information and personal bias, and I hurt a child in the process. She turned to Sarah specifically. Mrs. Martinez, I'm deeply sorry for dismissing your service and for causing your son to question himself and his family's history. You've clearly earned every honor and recognition you've received, and Tommy has every right to be proud of you. Sarah nodded, accepting the apology with grace. Mrs. Henderson, we all make mistakes. What matters now is how we move forward and what we learn from this experience. Sergeant Major Kim stepped forward with another folder. Mrs. Henderson, we've prepared some educational materials about women in the military, including information about policy changes and notable female service members throughout history. We thought you might find them useful for your classroom. The teacher accepted the materials gratefully, already mentally planning how she could incorporate this information into future lessons. Thank you. I clearly have a lot to learn, and I want to make sure this never happens again. Master Chief Rodriguez looked around the crowded classroom and smiled. Well, I think our work here is done. Sarah, it was good to see you again. Tommy, keep making your mother proud. As the veterans began to file out of the classroom, each one stopped to shake hands with both Sarah and Tommy, offering words of encouragement and support. Mrs. Henderson watched in amazement as these elite warriors showed such tenderness and care for a young boy and his mother. As the last of the veterans left the classroom, an unusual quiet settled over the space that had moments before been filled with the presence of 200 elite military personnel. Mrs. Henderson sat in her chair, still processing everything that had just occurred, while Tommy returned to his desk with a renewed sense of confidence and pride. Sarah remained behind, wanting to ensure that the situation was fully resolved and that her son would feel comfortable returning to school the next day. She could see that Mrs. Henderson was genuinely shaken by the experience, and, while part of her felt satisfied that the teacher had been educated about her assumptions, she also recognized an opportunity for positive change. "Mrs. Henderson," Sarah said gently, taking the seat across from the teacher's desk that she had declined earlier, "I want you to know that bringing my colleagues here wasn't about humiliation or revenge. It was about education and ensuring that Tommy never again feels ashamed of his family's service." The teacher nodded, wiping away tears that had been threatening to fall since the veterans began sharing their testimonials. "I understand, Mrs. Martinez. And I'm grateful that they took the time to educate me rather than simply being angry about my ignorance." Sarah glanced over at Tommy, who was quietly reading at his desk but clearly listening to their conversation. "Tommy has always been proud of our family's military tradition. His grandfather served in Vietnam, his uncle is currently deployed with the Air Force, and I served for 12 years. Military service is woven into the fabric of who we are." "I robbed him of that pride," Mrs. Henderson said quietly, "even if it was only temporarily." "But you can help restore it," Sarah replied. "And you can help other children in your class understand and respect military families better." Mrs. Henderson picked up the educational materials that Sergeant Major Kim had provided, flipping through pages of information about women in military service throughout American history. "I had no idea how much I didn't know. These materials show women serving in combat roles dating back to the Revolutionary War. The military has always evolved," Sarah explained. "What makes my generation different is that we're serving openly in roles that women have actually been performing unofficially for decades. Female pilots were flying combat missions in Iraq and Afghanistan long before the combat exclusion policy was officially lifted." The teacher absorbed this information, realizing how her assumptions had been based on outdated stereotypes rather than current reality. "Tommy mentioned that you saved people's lives during your service. Would you be willing to share some of those stories with the class? I think it would be incredibly educational for all the children." Sarah considered the request carefully. Much of her service involved classified operations that she could never discuss publicly, but there were certainly aspects of her experience that could be shared appropriately with children. "I could arrange a presentation about military service in general," Sarah offered. "I have several colleagues who do educational outreach in schools. We could put together a program that teaches children about the different branches of the military, the various roles that service members play, and how military families contribute to their communities." Mrs. Henderson's eyes lit up with enthusiasm for the first time since the conversation began. "That would be wonderful. I think the entire school would benefit from that kind of presentation." Tommy looked up from his book, excited by the possibility of his mother speaking to his class. "Mom, could you bring your medals? And maybe some of your gear?" Sarah smiled at her son's enthusiasm. "We'll see what we can arrange, buddy." Mrs. Henderson turned to address Tommy directly. "Tommy, I want to make sure you understand how sorry I am for not believing you about your mother's service. You were telling the truth, and I should have listened more carefully before making judgments." The 8-year-old considered this with the seriousness that children often bring to adult apologies. "It's okay, Mrs. Henderson. Mom always says that people can change their minds when they learn new things. You learned new things today." The simple wisdom of the child's response brought fresh tears to the teacher's eyes. She had expected anger or resentment from both mother and son, but instead found forgiveness and an opportunity for growth. Sarah stood to leave, satisfied that the immediate issue had been resolved. "Mrs. Henderson, I hope this experience helps you approach future situations with military children with greater understanding. Many of us have served in ways that might seem unusual or unlikely to civilians, but our children's pride in our service is always genuine." "Absolutely," Mrs. Henderson replied, standing as well. "I've learned a valuable lesson today about making assumptions and the importance of verifying information before dismissing a child's story." As Sarah and Tommy prepared to leave the classroom, Mrs. Henderson called out one more time. Mrs. Martinez, your colleagues mentioned that military children make sacrifices too. I'd like to learn more about how to better support students from military families. Do you have any resources you could recommend? Sarah paused at the doorway, impressed by the teacher's genuine desire to improve her understanding. There are several organizations that provide training for educators working with military children. I'll send you some information that might be helpful. Walking down the school hallway with Tommy, Sarah felt a sense of completion. The situation that had started with a dismissive laugh from a misinformed teacher had evolved into an educational opportunity that would likely benefit many more children than just her son. Tommy reached up to take his mother's hand as they exited the building. "Mom, are you mad at Mrs. Henderson?" Sarah squeezed his small hand gently. "No, sweetheart. Mrs. Henderson made a mistake, but she learned from it and apologized. That's what good people do when they realize they've been wrong about something." "And all your friends came to help," Tommy said with obvious pride. "That was really cool." Sarah chuckled softly. "Yes, they did. That's what we call having each other's backs. When you serve in the military, the bonds you form with your teammates last forever." As they reached their car, Tommy looked back at the school building thoughtfully. "Mom, do you think other kids have parents who served in the military but their teachers don't know about it?" "Probably," Sarah replied, recognizing the empathy in her son's question. "Military families are everywhere, and not everyone understands what modern military service looks like." "Maybe when you come talk to my class, kids from other classes could come too," Tommy suggested. "So their teachers can learn about military families." Sarah felt a surge of pride in her son's thoughtfulness and desire to help other children who might be facing similar situations. "That's a great idea, Tommy. We'll definitely suggest that to Mrs. Henderson." 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself standing in the Lincoln Elementary School auditorium, addressing an audience of over 300 students, teachers, and parents. The presentation she had organized included veterans from all branches of the military, representing diverse backgrounds and experiences. Mrs. Henderson sat in the front row, having helped coordinate the school-wide assembly. She had spent the intervening weeks educating herself about military families and had already implemented several changes in her classroom to better support students with military connections. During the presentation, Sarah spoke about the importance of service to country and community, while her colleagues shared age-appropriate stories about their experiences and the various roles that modern service members fulfill. They emphasized that military families come in all shapes and sizes, and that children of service members often develop unique strengths like resilience, adaptability, and cultural awareness due to their experiences. Tommy sat with his classmates, beaming with pride as his mother and her colleagues shared their knowledge with the school community. No longer did he feel the need to defend his family's history or question whether others would believe his stories. After the presentation, Mrs. Henderson approached Sarah with genuine gratitude. "Thank you for turning my mistake into such a positive learning experience for our entire school community." The feedback from other teachers has been overwhelmingly positive, and several have mentioned that they now better understand some of their students' family situations. Sarah smiled, seeing how the teacher had grown from the experience. "Mrs. Henderson, you could have responded to that day with defensiveness or anger, but instead you chose to learn and grow. That's the mark of a truly good educator." The teacher nodded thoughtfully. "I've been teaching for 18 years, and I thought I understood my students and their families. This experience taught me that I still have a lot to learn, and that's actually exciting rather than intimidating." As families began to leave the auditorium, several parents approached Sarah to thank her for the presentation and to share their own military connections. Some were veterans themselves, others had family members currently serving, and a few expressed newfound appreciation for the sacrifices that military families make. Tommy tugged on his mother's jacket sleeve. "Mom, Mrs. Henderson wants to know if we have any more pictures of you in your uniform that she can put in the classroom display about military families." Sarah looked over at the teacher, who was indeed organizing a new bulletin board dedicated to celebrating students' family members who had served or were currently serving in the military. "I think we can find some appropriate photos to share." Mrs. Henderson joined them, her arms full of materials for the display. I want to make sure that any students in my future classes who have military families feel comfortable sharing those connections. This display will help set the tone that military service is valued and respected in our classroom. As they prepared to leave the school that evening, Sarah reflected on how a moment of ignorance and prejudice had transformed into an opportunity for education and understanding. The teacher who had once laughed at the idea of a woman serving as a Navy SEAL now stood as an advocate for military families in her school community. Tommy walked beside his mother, chatting excitedly about the presentation and the positive reactions from his classmates. The doubt and hurt that had clouded his eyes weeks earlier had been replaced by renewed confidence and pride in his family's legacy of service. "Mom," Tommy said as they reached their car, "do you think Mrs. Henderson will ever make a mistake like that again?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "She might make different mistakes, Tommy, because everyone does. But I don't think she'll ever again dismiss a child's story about their family without taking time to learn the facts first." "Good," Tommy replied with satisfaction. "Because families like ours have important stories to tell." Sarah smiled at her son's wisdom, knowing that he had learned valuable lessons about standing up for truth, the power of education over ignorance, and the importance of having supportive communities. The incident that could have damaged his trust in authority figures had instead taught him that good people can change when presented with new information. As they drove home, Sarah's phone buzzed with messages from colleagues who had participated in the school presentation. The consensus was clear: the educational outreach had been so well received that they planned to offer similar presentations to other schools in the district. What had started as one teacher's misconception about women in military service had evolved into a broader community education initiative that would benefit countless students and families. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, the most challenging moments become the foundation for the most meaningful changes. Tommy fell asleep in the back seat during the drive home, exhausted from the excitement of the day. In the rearview mirror, Sarah could see the peaceful expression on his face, and she felt grateful that her son would grow up in a world where his family's service would be understood and respected, at least in part because of the lesson his teacher had learned that day when 200 elite operators walked into her classroom.